Oh, she turned it on?
How you doing? Good evening. Welcome to College Finance Night. I'm John Klassen, the Director of College Counseling here at Glenbrook South. I would also like to introduce my counterpart at North, who's here tonight, and thank him for helping to plan tonight's event, and that's David Boyle. David, are you out there in the audience at all anywhere? Okay. Thank you, David. If I could just quickly have a show of hands, where are our parents from Glenbrook South? If you could just raise your hand, and how about those from Glenbrook North? Again, welcome. We have a great program planned tonight. In just a few minutes, I'm going to introduce our guest speakers. But before I do, I want to mention a few key items regarding the financial aid process. And the first item that I want to mention is really the name of the game is early. With financial aid, the earlier you can get those applications in and get those FAFSAs in, the better the chance you have of securing those funds, especially those federal funds. Last year, Illinois MAP grant ran out in the third week of February. And so again, when we talk about getting those forms in early, and I know Jerry will follow up with this and so will Ruth, it's very important that you think about getting those applications done as soon as possible. Now that doesn't mean that needs to be done in the next couple of days, but certainly within the next month, that should be your time frame to make sure that you have those submitted and make sure that you secure that federal funding. The second item, equally as important, is communication. It's so important that you're communicating with your son or daughter during this process. Be realistic and honest about your expectations, because after all, you're the one who is most likely paying the bill. And I also believe you should have a conversation about what the options are if financial aid does not come through, or if you happen to be gapped at a college, meaning there's a gap between the aid you are offered and the cost of the school. It is always important to have financial safeties on your list of schools that you are considering. In those cases where you might need further clarification, reading financial aid packages or other help that you might need, please feel free to call the financial aid office directly. They really are nice people and want to help you. They're great to work with. Simply pick up the phone and dial them if you have questions. But if you have other questions, you can certainly contact the college counselors and the generalists at each of the schools as well to help you with guidance. Finally, we will have a FAFSA completion night at both schools to provide you with hands-on help in completing the FAFSA. And the night at Glenbrook South will be next Thursday from 5 to 8 p.m. in the GBS library. And GBN will be Wednesday, February 3rd from 5 to 7 in the GBN library. Again, we will have ISAC professionals there, as well as other folks who have worked in financial aid to help you step-by-step complete those FAFSA forms. So we certainly want to take out any of that anxiety that you might have in terms of completing those forms and work with you on those nights. I would now like to introduce our accomplished speakers for tonight. Combined, they have over 40 years of experience and have been featured on Good Morning America, the CBS News, and WGN News. Jerry Zabrinsky currently serves as the Associate Vice President for Financial Aid at Lake Forest College and will be presenting a step-by-step guide to completing the FAFSA, and that presentation will take place here in the auditorium. Ruth Pusich currently serves as Director of Student Financial Services at Elmhurst College and will be presenting on how the financial aid process works, federal methodology, and understanding financial aid packages. Ruth's presentation will take place in the Student Activity Center, and we have some of our counselors here to help guide you to that location. There will be time at the end of each session for questions, and I would also like to add that these presentations will be recorded, so you'll have access to them on our website after the program. So if you don't have two of you here, you can certainly access those later on our website. So with that, we will now go ahead and split into our different locations. So if you're going to Ruth's presentation, we have some counselors in the back that will help escort you to the Student Activity Center. And for those that would like to stay for Jerry's presentation, go ahead and be seated. We'll start that presentation in a few minutes. Thanks.
Hey, John. Credit Coast.
Hey, good to see you, Mr. Credit Coast.
How you doing?
Good.
Good. Hey, you're up here just running the show.
Yeah. Hey,
Hi,
good to see you
Mike
again.
Jerma.
Yeah, good to see you, Mr.
I don't. If I can only do one, which one do I want to go to?
Well, it depends. You know, I think it really, if you're going to come to our FAFSA completion rate next week, you know,
I'm going to come to that.
yeah, then I would go ahead and go see Ruth because they will kind of walk you through the.
I mean, I've done a lot of research on my own, but I haven't opened up that FAFSA at all.
Yeah.
But it's just going to be basically following your category, isn't it?
Yeah, but we'll walk you through that.
When I'm here next week,
Yeah.
we'll go do the other thing
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
Okay.
And again, you can access this online too.
Online too.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, thanks so much. How you doing? You good? He's doing great. Yeah, really good to see him. Kim was out there with him right now. We went back a week early so he could play in some school. Yeah, he's doing fine. Yeah, it's good. He hated high school.
I know. But he's doing well now.
Yeah, Nicole just she loved it.
Yeah,
Take care.
it's good to see you. Absolutely. I'm looking at it. More often next week. I'm going to get that from GBS. Okay, so that night at GBM, if you go to GBM, you'll get the funds.
Oh, that's a bright light. Well, thanks. People stayed for my session. Yay. Thank you very much. My name is Jerry Sabrinsky. I'm at Lake Forest College. I've known John for 20 years. When did you graduate from the college? 1996. John is an illustrious grad of Lake Forest College. And not just because he's in the room, but he is wonderful. He's an expert at what he does. So at the end, when we talk about where to find help and everything, I would go to John. I've taught him everything he knows about financial aid, kinda. Not everything, you know, give him a little bit of, but you're welcome to ask him. You're welcome to ask him to ask me. Lots of places that you'll look for help. This session is mostly going to be based on, or going to focus on filling out the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form. Maybe you're familiar with it already. So I just want to focus on that, give you some sense of what's going on. We'll talk a little bit about what happens next and kind of your next step. And certainly if you have any questions about anything, you know, throughout the process, feel free, you know, to ask me. I've been in the profession of financial aid for 33 years, and I love what I do. I love being able to share this exciting, wonderful, sexy, you know, information, you know, with you guys. So really tonight is the how-to of some of the financial aid forms. The free application for federal student aid, that is the application that every family is completing for any college across the country, 2-year, 4-year, public, private, undergrad, graduate. It's a one-size-fits-all application to start the process. It collects enough general information, both demographic and financial, to calculate what we like to call an index number. Really, this index number is just a sense of where the family falls on the continuum of all the families filling out the FAFSA any given year. So whether they absolutely qualify for federal aid based on the formula, or maybe not federal, but maybe something from the state, or not from the state, but definitely something from the college itself. This just starts the process, and it starts the conversation that we'll have, because this collects enough information. It's not the best application out there. Certainly, it doesn't address a lot of issues that we'll talk about, you know, in just a little bit, but it is a really good start, and it's a required start. So you must do it if you want to be considered for anything from any college whatsoever. The FAFSA form itself, the free application for federal student aid, is available January 1st for the upcoming school year, except that changes for next year. So there was a recent change a couple months ago where now the FAFSA is available January 1st. For the 2017-18 school year, it's going to be available in October of 2016. So you'll actually, because you fill out a FAFSA every year while your child is in college, you're filling out a FAFSA now, and then you'll fill out another one in October. It just kind of shifts the whole process over by about 3 months. The website, yeah, absolutely.
Like taxes, are you filling it out for like all these current information, all the same information?
Yeah, a good question is, when you're filling out the FAFSA now, a lot of this information just kind of transfers over to the next one. Here's an interesting twist. So the FAFSA is always, as you can see my fourth bullet point there, is always based on the preceding tax year. So this FAFSA that you're filling out is based on the 2015 calendar year and what your income was. Eventually, when you get your taxes done for 2015, because you don't have them now, you'll update that information. In October, that's also going to change, and it's called, the financial aid lingo is called prior year. So instead, what's going to happen is next year's FAFSA is also going to be based on 2015 information, because that's two prior years, 2 years before, which is kind of weird. So in sense, the question is, you're filling this out now, and you're really just kind of saying, yep, everything's the same, because it is the same. The reason that it's being switched to this prior year is because a lot of this application is so income driven that you absolutely can estimate. That's not a problem, and we'll talk about that. But if you have your taxes done from a previous year already, there's a tool that we'll also talk about called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool. You'll be able to access that in the FAFSA and just pull all of your information in from the IRS database, and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about, well, what do they want in this line item? It's already populated for you. It's going to make it a lot easier for you. The one thing that is kept in this process is any kinds of changes to income. So even if 2015, when you're filling it out in October, is not reflective of what is going to happen in 2017, we can still take that into account. We've always been able to take projected information into consideration, and we always will be. This is just an easier way to start the process to get the application done. So it'll make it a lot easier, a whole lot easier, when you're filling this out again in October. So to make that short answer even longer, it's available at the FAFSA.gov website. That used to be important because there was another website called FAFSA.com, which was a proprietary site that, a third party that would say, hey, for the low fee of only $99, give us your information, we'll fill out the FAFSA for you, basically, and we'll send it off to the federal student aid programs. You didn't need to do that, and eventually and finally, the Department of Ed basically bought that website, bought that domain name, and shut them down. So there is no more FAFSA.com. It's all FAFSA.gov, and FAFSA.gov has always been the place that you want to go to. It's 7 steps long, there, and you'll see on the little progress bar, what the steps are. And again, as I mentioned, it's based on always the preceding, the prior year information. When we look just kind of generally, and I've got screenshots to go into more detail of this, when we're looking at parent information on here, some of the questions it asks for is, how many people are living at home? How many people do you support? How many people are under the same roof? of your kids, of all the kids that you have, how many will be in college at least half time during the upcoming school year? It asks questions like, well, it won't ask you the actual age of the older parent, but it will ask you the birth date of the parents. And the reason for that is because the older a parent is, the more income and more assets are protected for retirement, basically. Yeah. Hold that thought. I'll talk about that in just a second. I mentioned that it will ask you for some income information, both taxable, untaxable, and untaxed income, which we gather off of the tax return. Even though this application and the whole process is more income driven than anything else, in fact, 96% of the time, back up, only 4% of the time did family have enough savings and assets and net worth for it to affect the eligibility. So 96% of the time, everything was based on just more income than anything else. That said, it still asks for asset information, which we'll see in just a little bit. Same kinds of questions are asked of the student, so really parallel tracks for the parent and the student. And then finally, at the end of the application, you'll notice there's a section where you are sending this information off to the different colleges that you're interested in, that your son or daughter is interested in. You can list up to 10 different colleges at the same time, and we all get that information simultaneously. If for some reason you're looking at, or your son or daughter is looking at more than 10 colleges, once you go through the initial round of sending this out, you'll be able to go back in and add the 11th, 12th, and 13th college. I went to a conference in December, late November, early December, a financial aid conference. On one hand, there were about 8,500 of my fun colleagues from across the country. No, financial aid conferences are not all that fun. The sessions, and there had like 100 sessions, they were all pretty data driven and statistics and everything. On the other hand, it was in Las Vegas. And so I was like, okay, I have to go because I have to learn stuff. And I don't know, I didn't gamble too much, but in fact, I love my money. I don't gamble, but I put 20 bucks in the nickel slot machine, won 55 bucks, and I was done. I was so done. Went to a nice buffet. I was good. At this conference, one of the things that they talked about was why it's limited to 10 schools. You would think technologically, because it's on the web, it's in the cloud, that you can put as many schools you want. Statistically, over 60%, about 62% of freshmen only list one school on the FAFSA, which I find really hard to believe. And so that's why there's no incentive to make more slots on there. About almost 75%, which makes sense, of returning students put only one school on there. But for the majority of students who only list one school, 10 slots is probably enough. For those students who are looking at more than 10, and there certainly are, that's where you'll have to go back in and change, add some of those additional schools. To start the process, to even get access to the FAFSA, there is something required called a federal student aid ID. It used to be called a PIN, and maybe you have one if you've done a FAFSA before. The PIN has to be converted, if you have that, is converted to this FSA ID. To do the FSA ID, you can go right to fsaid.ed.gov. You can go to studentaid.ed.gov/FSA ID. But basically, you're applying for an ID to get into the FAFSA. The student applies for one, and the parent applies for one. Let me see if I've got. No, let me go back. The student applies for one, and the parent applies for a separate ID. The student's ID is what they use to log into the FAFSA. The parent's ID is what you'll use to sign the FAFSA electronically. So it'll all happen automatically. There's no paper you need to print. You could if you wanted to, but you won't need to. Yes, wasn't there?
If you got one years ago for another child, you apply again, or if you forgot, then
Yes, to both of those. If you have one already, you have a PIN. You have to convert that to this FSA ID. If you forgot what the PIN was, that's fine. You'll be able to do an FSA ID from scratch. So you'll need to do another one anyway. Yeah. That's a good question. That's changed for this upcoming school year? No. Yes, I'm sorry. The question is, when you list these 10 schools on the FAFSA, do the schools who receive the FAFSA results, do they see those other 10 schools? No, not anymore. It used to be that we could see that. There was some thought out there that schools were looking at that and looking at the order in which schools were listed, saying, well, you know, if we're in number one, the number one slot, that they really want to get here, you know, be here. If we're number 10, maybe not so much. Schools didn't do that. I mean, there was that thought out there, but to eliminate that risk or that temptation, when we get the FAFSA results at a college, we do not see any of the other schools at all. We just see our school. Nobody sees the other schools except for you. When you get your confirmation of the filling out the FAFSA, you will see that the schools that you listed, so that you can make sure that the schools listed are the ones you want listed. But no, good question. Yeah, follow up. The question is, do they see the number of schools? No, we see nothing whatsoever about the number of schools you have applied to or you have listed on the FAFSA or anything like that. Sure, yeah.
All right, so we started filling it out. We put 5 schools. One of the schools is in Canada. So obviously, there's a federal ID. Do we even put that one out?
Yeah, so the question is, if you're looking at it and you're putting colleges on there and one happens to be in Canada, no, you cannot get any kind of financial aid for the Canadian school. They don't have, no, you can't access them. So don't even bother. Yeah. It's hard for me to see, sorry, yeah.
Do we need these IDs for both ourselves and our kids for next week when we come in, or we do that part of the process?
You could do it. So the question is, do you need this now? Do you need it next week when you're coming into the FAFSA workshop? I would do it because I know how excited you will be to do this. When you leave here, I would do it tonight as soon as you get home. Have it handy. I mean, you could do it, on the spot, but I would have it handy because the process of getting an FSA ID takes more than a couple minutes. There are a whole series of questions that are asked because it's a very, very, very secure process. That's why it asks all these challenge questions, these security questions. One of them, just so that you'll know, is it will ask you for a significant date in your life. That's tough, I think. I mean, when I had to get an FSA ID because all financially people need one, and I'm like, there are so many significant dates. And will I remember the significant date I put down 5 years from now when I'm thinking, oh, there's an even more significant date now. So just keep track of how you answer some of those security questions. You'll know the ones. You need your social, date of birth, and address, fine, date of birth. But some of the other questions, your favorite color, plaid. Your first pet's name, so stuff like that. Just kind of keep track, commit that to memory or jot it down. But was there a question back there? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, busted. I told you couldn't get into the FAFSA unless you had an FSA ID. You kind of could get into the FAFSA. You eventually will need that FSA ID. The student will need it in order to submit the FAFSA. It's easier and much easier to access it when you have, otherwise you have to put in the identifying information. But once you have the ID, it's just putting in that ID. You don't have to put anything else, no save key or anything like that. So you're right, I mean, you could, but it won't do you any good because eventually you will need to do the ID. So the general student information that's asked for starts on this application, it really is just some identifying information. Who is the student filling out this application? What's their name, address, social security number, date of birth? It starts the identifying process and the demographic kind of process. So it asks for some of these things on there. The last bullet point you see is the dependency status. Unless a student is 24 years old or married or a graduate student, or they're considered a dependent student, which means parent information is required. The reason it asks, some of those questions is, again, because this is a one-size-fits-all application. So a graduate student is filling this out, an adult student is filling this out. So it'll be questions that pertain to everybody on there. Information about the parents are pretty much the same thing in terms of demographics and identifying, and then goes into more detail about income in 2015, some of your assets, how many kids do you have, how many people living at home. When they talk about the parents, if parents are married, then both parents' information is required on the application. A little aside, I talked about that FSA ID. Only one parent needs to have an ID to sign the application electronically. You'll have both parents' information on the form, but really only one FSA ID is needed. Both parents could get one if you want to. It doesn't matter, but it's only going to ask for one. Yeah.
Have you completed with FAFSA and number one, I found it as a simple FAFSA list and
Mm-hmm.
required, but also as a divorced parent, there was not one question about the father for the FAFSA. So can you speak to that?
Yes. So the question is about, and it's a nice segue into, if you're married, both parents' information. If you're divorced or separated, it's only what we call the custodial parent whose information is required on the FAFSA. So by custodial, we mean who is the student living with or has lived with the most over the last 12 months. And if I had this question the other night, if it's joint custody, luckily, because there are 365 days in the year, it can't be exactly the same amount. Maybe it could be, but then it's almost do your best guess to choose. But on the FAFSA, if parents are divorced or separated, it only wants to know about that one parent with whom the student is living. It doesn't matter in the case of divorce decrees or who gets to claim the student as a tax exemption. That doesn't matter. It all goes back to residency. Yeah.
Well, that was a difficult question because college board is so much more lenient and accounting everywhere. But so there's no consideration to the ability to pay for non-residential, non-custodial.
Yes, there is. So what about the non-custodial parent? So one of the other applications, supplemental application, which we'll also talk about in just a little bit, is called the College Scholarship Service Financial Aid Profile, or a lot of schools have standalone financial aid applications to supplement the FAFSA. These standalone applications or the profile will ask about the other parent, the non-custodial parent. And they will ask if there's any kind of agreement, court-ordered agreement, or any other kind of agreement that the other parent is paying for college. Some colleges, there's approximately 300 colleges or so that may ask for that non-custodial parent's information. The reason that the FAFSA does not ask for it is because over the years, we have found from research that like 97% of the time, there is nothing coming from the non-custodial parent. So it's not worth it. Again, to talk about your one-size-fits-all application, it's not worth it to tailor this to all sorts of situations. So it's been found that the other parent is probably not going to do anything. But schools may require that information. It's funny, I talked to some of my colleagues at other schools, and we can answer almost every financial aid question with, it depends. Because it depends on the other college, it depends on the circumstances, but a good question to ask. In the case of step parents, if there's a step parent involved, it's the biological parent and the step parent's information that is required on the application. One of the nice features is that even though it asks for the step parent information, they may or may not have an obligation to that student. There is a way for them to indicate on the FAFSA that they do have a financial obligation to their other family. So it doesn't balance it out completely, but it does take into account that there might be, some other, resources leaving the current household to go somewhere else. When you access the FAFSA, the home page of the FAFSA.gov, this is what you'll see. This is what you'll click on, to just get into it, to start the new FAFSA. This is where we'll ask for either the student's FSA ID, or on that second column there on the right, you'll see you could enter the student's information if you don't have an ID, and that's where you could get started even without one. Yeah. Yeah.
So, as another individual, I started doing this, and I went through student information, specifically because do not log in with the FSA ID. Student created FSA. It's going to tell me to go create my own. So obviously I'm going to go create my own, but I'm not going to be able to enter it.
Good question. The question is about, if you've started this, and that's a more global question because this is all student-centered. This is student financial aid. So this is the student who is supposed to be filling out this application initially. They're the ones who are supposed to be accessing this. You'll see, and the FAFSA does a really good job of, on the left-hand side there, it says student. So when they want the student to be an active participant in this, it's their student financial aid that they're receiving. Your information is required, and you'll enter some of the parent information, but initially, it really should be the student that's putting this on there. So when you see that, it's thinking you're the student. So it really is aiming their.
Where am I
at the very end? We'll see that at the very end. If not now, not anything up front. You'll enter your parent FSA ID at the very end of the application. Again, and this is once you get that entry, this is what you'll see at the start of the 2016-17 FAFSA. And these are just screenshots of what you'll see, and some of you have already seen this. It really is very basic. Questions you'll see at the top, the kind of the progress bar. Those are the 7 steps I talked about, where it starts by asking about the student demographics, then goes into some of the other information. Again, name, address, social security number, driver's license if there is one. More student eligibility. This is where it determines whether a student is dependent or independent. They have to be, a student needs to be a citizen or a permanent resident in order to be eligible for any federal or state financial aid, not for institutional financial aid, but this is a federal application, so that's one of the very first criteria that it looks at. There was a question earlier, and a good question, that still, and it doesn't make sense, and we're trying to get rid of it, but still, a male student, once they turn 18, needs to register with Selective Service. We don't have a draft anymore, and the question is, anybody can enroll in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, Marines. So male or female, why is it still male? It is still male. It's an act of Congress that needs to remove that question from the FAFSA. But if a student, so if they're 17 years old and they're filling out this FAFSA, they don't have to go online to register for Selective Service or go to the post office like we had to do, but they can actually answer the one question, check the box that says register me. I'm not registered with Selective Service, go ahead and register me. The FAFSA then collects that information, sends it off to Selective Service, and male student doesn't need to do anything else. So it's a nice little feature. You don't have to worry about that. If a student does not check that box, they will get financial aid for their freshman year because you don't have to register until you're 18 years old. But then their sophomore year, they will have to register with Selective Service before they'll be eligible for financial aid again. And then some questions about, will you have, what kind of degree will you have you ever received federal student aid before? There's 2 questions, 2 areas on the FAFSA that refer to schools. Very different in terms of this first section talks about the high school that the student, from which the student graduated, as opposed to the school that the student is interested in attending as a college or university. This first section talks about the high school the student went to. That's important because the federal government is collecting just some demographic information and making sure, and this was born a couple of years ago, where there was this threat, or there are some high school diploma mills out there. And so this is a way to say, no, this student, went to Glenbrook South, went to Glenbrook North. Yes, that is a genuine, bona fide high school. So this is where the student would list what high school they went to. Here is the other section that talks about the schools, where it says, okay, we want to send this information off to the colleges you're interested in. Tell us who they are. Every college has its own unique federal school code. Canadian schools won't have that because they're not eligible for federal aid. It's important, especially for systems like University of Wisconsin. Wisconsin Platteville, Wisconsin La Crosse, Wisconsin Madison, all have a different federal school code. That's the only way we get this information, is if we are listed on the FAFSA with our federal school code. The federal school code at Lake Forest is 001706. Just in case you wanted to know that. I'm just saying, 001706. But that's the example of, if you listed Lake Forest and put the federal school code on there, we would get the results of the FAFSA. Every school would get it that way. A couple ways that you can access the different colleges. One of the very first things that you'll notice when you look at financial aid websites at the colleges is they will tell you what their federal school code is, basically, and that's what you'll plug in. If you don't know it, you can plug in the name of the school or the state it's located in or a partial name and kind of do a really nice search, and it will then tell you, and I don't know if I've got, I don't, but it will pull up a list of schools that it might be what you're looking for. You click on that and just drops that information into the FAFSA. To refer to the question earlier, it doesn't matter, when you list the schools, what order you list them in. It can be random, it can be any kind of haphazard. Nobody looks at that information. Nobody can look at that information anymore. State grant program. So here in Illinois, there's an agency called the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. They're the ones who administer the state grant program called the MAP grant, some state scholarship programs. On one hand, with the state of Illinois budget right now, meaning there is no state of Illinois budget, this MAP grant, we think, is being funded for this current school year. We've not heard anything. I just had a meeting this morning, a conference call. There is still no state budget for the state grant. So we assume it will get funded eventually. For a student to be considered for the state grant, really you just fill out the FAFSA. And if a student graduates from an Illinois high school and attends an Illinois college university, they will be considered for this MAP grant. It's not transportable, so they can't take it out of Illinois to go to Iowa or California. If students are coming into Illinois from other states, they can't bring their state grants into us. So it stays in the state. It's our taxpayer dollars that are funding this, so that's why it stays in the state. But just listing Illinois colleges on here will automatically consider the student for the MAP grant. When it asks about the parents' demographic information, this is kind of what you'll see. And again, depending on how you, and this is a pretty smart app, as it goes along. It's smarter than it used to be. When you answer the question, are you married or remarried, then it will ask for both parents' information. If you were to answer divorced or separated, you'll only see one parent column on there. And it will ask you, well, it won't even ask you if it's the mother or the father. It will just say parent 1 and parent 2. And then just go into more detail about your demographic information, your email address, your address, your date of birth and stuff. Let me talk about the email address, a very interesting conversation that we have at colleges all the time. The primary source, and John talked about this earlier, communication is so important through this process. The primary means of the way colleges communicate with students is by email. Students don't read their email nearly as much as we read ours. I mean, someone's probably reading email right now, I'm sure. And that's okay, I'm fine with that. But we're reading email all the time. Colleges are trying to find other means, other ways to communicate effectively with students for a couple reasons. One, some colleges are pretty conservative when it comes to FERPA and privacy laws, so that they will only communicate with the student. If the email is the primary means of communication, that's going to be tough for you to stay in the loop if the student is not reading their email. Some colleges will automatically include the parent on every kind of correspondence, every kind of communication, but it's a good question to ask the colleges now and the next couple months is, how will you as the parent stay in the loop? Does the student need to sign and give me express written consent to get copied on everything? Will the school automatically do that? Again, I go back to that, it depends. It depends on the school. Some will automatically copy the parent, some won't. A suggestion that I was given years ago, which could work for some families, is to create a family email account just for this purpose. We don't look to see, to whom an email necessarily belongs. If we see the same email under the student's information and the parent's information, we don't care. There's nothing we can do about it. So creating a family email account might not be so bad, because some of the information that we're sending is very time sensitive. And unless somebody is reading this, you can miss a deadline, like literally miss a deadline by 1 minute and be out thousands of dollars. So it's important to stay in communication, for you to ask us, be proactive. For the colleges, again, we're trying so many different things, whether it's, and again, I'm not technologically inept, I'm not social media inept. I just, I have a little distance with, I don't have a Facebook account, so I don't Facebook. I don't know if that's even a verb or not, but my staff wanted to create a Facebook page, and I'm hesitant because if people don't like us, how pathetic are we if we don't have any followers? And so then we start thinking, well, maybe we should tweet. Well, yeah, maybe we should tweet 5 years ago. Maybe now it's Instagram or Snapchat, or I have no idea what the latest thing is. So yeah. No, the question is, what if you just put the parent's email address in the student section? No reason not to. I mean, we won't know, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine. Except you have to make sure you communicate with the student then too. I mean, there will be some stuff that goes to them, and as long as they're okay with that, then fine. Yeah. The last thing, yeah, I'm sorry. On the FAFSA, the question is, when it asks for the email, it does not have to be different. It can be the same. There's no edit that just kind of rejects it or throws up a red flag. No. So but the last thing about this communication, which there is something that we've been doing that we find very effective, which means I think a lot more colleges will be asking you for cell phone numbers because we're texting a whole lot more than we ever used to. Everyone is reading their texts. And we're sending out texts to the students saying, we need to see you, check your email. We send you an important message. And we'll also do that with, we'll do an email blast. And a lot more colleges will do that, both to the student and the parent, especially when it comes to deadlines. That's the most popular, the most important thing that financial aid offices and admissions offices will use in terms of communication. Just more information about some of these screenshots. It shows you the parent tax information page. I have highlighted where this is where you could go in and use the IRS data retrieval tool in this section here. It will ask you, did you file a tax return? Did you do it recently? Here is where, before you get to the end of the application, where it will ask for the parent's ID number if you want to link to the IRS database. The IRS data retrieval tool, DRT, is not available until early February and won't have your information until 3 weeks after you file your taxes electronically. So it doesn't do us any good for the next couple of weeks, but that's where we will tell you, every college will tell you, just estimate your information. Don't worry about it being absolutely correct. If you ballpark it within a couple $1,000, $10,000, you're fine. It's not going to affect the bottom line overall, and you can adjust it later. So at this time of year, you cannot use the data retrieval tool. You will use the data retrieval tool eventually, maybe in March or April, because colleges will send you estimates and say, now we need your actual information to finalize the financial aid offer that we gave to you. So that's when they will then say, go back in, use the DRT. If you can't use the DRT, we've got some other options for you, but use the DRT. See, next year, when the DRT will be available right away because your taxes will have been on file for months with the IRS already. So that's a nice little feature, a nice little change for next year. Here's the IRS data retrieval tool. The nice thing about it is that it reduces errors. I mean, you don't have to think about what answers to put on one of the line items for the FAFSA when it says, yeah, look at line 31 of the 1040, what was your adjusted gross income? It's in the database at the IRS. It'll just transfer that over for you eventually. Right now, you can use your 2014 tax return as a guide to answer some of the questions on the FAFSA. That's absolutely okay, and that's what's encouraged and recommended by every college right now. Go ahead and use that to put some information on there.
So if we estimate now, that's available early February, or taxes early, is it still going to be at 2014?
No, so the question is, if you estimate using 2014, you put some information down there. When you use the data retrieval tool, it will only access 2015 or 2015. Yeah, so it won't go back to 2014. It won't allow you to grab that information. If 2015 is on file with the IRS, that's the information it will grab. If it's not on file or yet, then it will say unavailable, try back later. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how long does it take for the information to become available at the IRS? We're told 3 weeks, barring any, well, and this year there shouldn't be. I mean, last couple of years there have been some delays with the IRS. Actually, this is funny because the IRS website was actually down from December 29th until just a day or two ago for whatever reason. Maintenance, which usually happens over the weekend or in the wee hours of the morning, but for some reason it was down for several days. But we don't anticipate, we don't see that as, uh-oh. We probably see that because the IRS database had that breach, recently, we probably see that as some really secure measures being done so that that never, ever happens again. I like some of these slide transitions, yes? Yeah, I know it doesn't take much in a financial aid office to kind of fascinate us, but yeah. Yes, good question. If you've got 2 kids in college, you're doing 1 FAFSA for every student in college. Here's a nice feature that the FAFSA offers is when you get 1 FAFSA done, you can click on a link at the very end of it to transfer the parent information to the next FAFSA that you're going to work on. So you don't have to do any parent information whatsoever. You'll just plug in the second student's information on there. This is, with the DRT, this is what you'll see. It says, hey, you're leaving the IRS database, you're leaving the FAFSA, you're going into the IRS database. What I've highlighted here is the information that will already be populated with your name and the address and the type of tax return that you might be filing. The most important part on here is that little, well, let you move up a little bit, but that little box that says, here's the problem we see most of the time. You get to this part, and if you look on the far right-hand side there, you'll see that little button that says transfer now. People will click on that transfer now, but you have to check that box by the big red arrow that I put on there. Just check that box, and then it will transfer that information. It's weird. You won't get an error if you clicked on transfer now without checking that box. You won't get an error that says, okay, nothing went over. Don't know why you came into the DRT site, but we will get an error on our end says parents access the DRT, but no transfer of information was done. So it's one of those little bugs that needs to be fixed. You would think you'd get to this point, but make sure it's still not fixed yet. So make sure that when you are doing the DRT, you are checking that box. And then this is what you'll see. You'll confirm that the information has been brought back into the FAFSA. You'll automatically leave the IRS site. It will close that browser that you were using, and it'll show you that everything has been successfully transferred. When you get to the part where you're signing this application electronically, the student, if the student has an FSA ID and used it to enter the FAFSA, they're already in there. So they don't need to sign it because they kind of signed it by using their ID to actually access the FAFSA. There's one little button at the very bottom there that says, read before proceeding. It's probably one of those, you could read it. It's words, words, words. If it's like a lot of these things that I would imagine a lot of us do, we see these words and say, yeah, we scroll down, fine, I agree. I don't have a choice. But the student needs to click on that agree button and then to sign it there. Similarly with the parent information, this is where it will say, okay, if you want to sign as the parent, which parent are you signing? Is it parent 1, parent 2? They still have mother, father, step parent on here. Then you would click on the agree sign, and then that's where you would put your FSA username and ID at the bottom there. That's your electronic signature. Then you would sign that and send that off. You will then get this confirmation page that says, great, information has been sent. We're going to forward it to these colleges on here. In all of the years of the FAFSA being available online, knock wood, I have never, ever seen a loss of data. I've never seen FAFSA just kind of disappear into the clouds and to be found again. I've never seen, maybe famous last words, but I've never seen a security breach, identity theft, loss of data, or anything like that. It's a very secure site. It has been, and even more secure now with the implementation of the FSA ID. So that is a very good thing. And here's where you'll see the confirmation that says these are the schools that we sent it to. I didn't highlight this, but in that very first paragraph, does your brother or sister need to complete a FAFSA? There's that link there that says transfer the parent information to the next FAFSA. Lots of places on the FAFSA site itself that you can get help. I mean, some of the arrows, you know, in the middle on the left there, the school code search. If you haven't gotten that federal school code from the school, if you can't remember Lake Forest, which is 001706, you can click on that link there. Click on some of those links at the top. The studentaid.ed.gov, well, studentaid.gov website is really nice because that just goes into more detail about some of the federal aid programs out there and student loan programs and student loan repayment and all sorts of different things. The announcements are on there, the FAFSA filing options. Speaking of the FAFSA filing options, you can click here, but you don't need to, because if you want to take a, if you're like me, very kind of visual, very tactile kind of person, there is a FAFSA on the web worksheet that you can download and take a look at that and start to fill that out before you transfer any information onto the FAFSA on the website itself. We've got those printed for you, and John and his staff will hand those out at the very end if you want a FAFSA on the web worksheet. Kind of take a look at that. That gives you a sense of what you will see when you eventually do enter the FAFSA on the web. Some of the frequently asked questions, again, that you're able to list up to 10 different colleges. Estimate your information on there. It does not have to be absolutely correct. We would much rather you get something done, especially because some colleges will have very early deadlines. There are some colleges that say you've got to get the FAFSA done by January 15th. Well, there's obviously no way. You won't have a W-2 form until, excuse me, the end of January. So it's okay to estimate this information for some of these early deadlines. The most common FAFSA deadline that I've seen at a lot of colleges, at a lot of private colleges, will be about the middle of February 15th or so, which is why you have some time in the first couple of weeks of February to gather some of your information to make a really good ballpark. I wouldn't wait much past the middle of February. And one of the very first things that I would do, again, even tonight when you get home, is check the different colleges to see what their deadlines are. They could be all over the place. And again, if you're like me, a very visual kind of, if something is out of sight, it's out of mind for me. So my refrigerator has like tons of stuff tacked on it, to-do list and coupons and stuff. Maybe create a little spreadsheet for yourself with the names of the different schools and the requirements, and maybe include a column of a contact person. And when you confirmed with them that, yeah, I called Lake Forest College on January 31st, Jerry said that everything was fine. Good, I'll follow up with them later. My estimated time of getting some kind of response back is 2 weeks. I'll follow up again in 2 weeks. So if that helps for some families, it's good to keep track of these different deadlines to make sure you're not missing out on literally thousands of dollars. We talked about the parents' information that's required on here. When the FAFSA asks for assets, what it's asking for is really kind of cash on hand, stuff that you have easy access to, whether it's savings, other real estate, 529 plans, if you own one of these education savings plans, yes. No, good question. If you've got multiple 529 plans, all of your 529 plans that you are the owner of are considered an asset on here. So if you've got 3 529 plans and they're each worth $25,000, then you're listing that your 529 plans are worth $75,000. So it's not just that one for the student on here. A quick note about this whole, I talked earlier about not having enough assets to really affect the bottom line. Truly, when all is said and done, unless you have net worth, unless you have 529 plans worth $150,000 total, or you have savings accounts or cash in the mattress, that's over $150,000, it's not going to affect the bottom line. A good rule of thumb, kind of when all is said and done, it's really tough. Some of these calculations, these formulas are very complicated, very magical, it's like secret, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you, that type of thing. But really, for the assets that a parent has, when all is said and done, about 5% of what a parent has as their net worth is going to be considered a resource. So if you've got $20,000 in savings or $50,000, then 5% of that is going to be used as a resource. To back up a little bit, what the FAFSA does automatically, when I talked about the age of the older parent, a certain dollar amount is automatically protected depending on how old the parents are. So parents could have $50,000 in savings, for example, but the first $25,000, sometimes the first $40,000 of that is protected for retirement. So effectively, it's as if you have $5,000 or $10,000 that comes into play in the formula. So one of the questions the FAFSA will ask, and this talk about it becoming a smarter application, is when it knows, when you plug in your birth date, it will say, okay, according to our asset protection allowance, do you have net worth of greater than $40,000? If so, what do you have? If not, skip it. We don't even want to know. So that's one of the nice features of the FAFSA that you'll run across. When we talk about assets, what we're not talking about are home equity, anything to do with the home. So on the flip side, we don't want the value of the home. We also don't want the mortgage on the home. So home equity is just excluded from the formula completely. Retirement accounts, the amount that you have in a 401k or an IRA or TIA CREF, or anything like that, retirement accounts are excluded from the process. Insurance policies, annuities, it's really only kind of that cash on hand, something that you could access without having penalty for early withdrawal. Yeah. Wow. That's, so here's the question is, the FAFSA is always based on a snapshot in time. So as of the date you're filling this out, what are your assets? So if you were to fill this out today, yeah, the stock's not so much. You can, again, if it makes a difference to the eligibility, you could follow up with the college and say, when I fill this out, yeah, it was at 17.4. Now it's at 16.5, type thing. So we can make adjustments to that. You will know when you get your student aid, the confirmation of the FAFSA, you'll get that confirmation page, but then it'll also follow up with something called a student aid report. A student aid report is kind of the summary of what you reported and what's being sent to the different colleges. There's a way to look on there to see how much of your contribution comes from income, how much comes from assets itself. So it could be 0 assets and then fine, it doesn't matter, but it's a good question to follow up with the different colleges in case it keeps tanking, God forbid. And then Johnny, what'd I do? Magic. 1 FAFSA per student. John, why isn't it? Hold on. Why is it not advancing? There we go. No, you sit down. That's good. Yeah, go ahead. No, good question. Is it mandatory to fill out a FAFSA? No, not at all. If all you want to be considered for is merit-based financial aid, it's a scholarship from the college, which is solely based on the student's credentials and nothing else, fine, but no worries. You only fill out a FAFSA if you want to be considered for something more than just the scholarship that they were offered at the time of admission. That's the only reason. You don't have to. The other thing, and this is interesting, because I see FAFSA results that come into us, and I'm not kidding, and I'm not sharing anything out of school, where I see incomes of $3 million on the FAFSA, and the parents still filled out the FAFSA because, and when talking with them, you have to fill out a FAFSA if you want the student to have at least a student loan or sometimes a work-study job. And so a lot of parents saying, yeah, that's skin in the game. We love it. It's skin in the game. If you let them invest in themselves, if the college is going to give them a $30,000 scholarship, it'd be nice to see that the student is taking out a $5,000 student loan to invest in themselves. The only way to do that is through the use of filling out the FAFSA and then being eligible for that way. So sometimes that's what we see happen. In addition to the FAFSA, I talked about that's kind of that one-size generic, one-size-fits-all application. It doesn't allow you to go into much detail about other special circumstances that you have. You can't stream of consciousness or color outside the lines. That's why these other supplemental applications are out there that allow you, like the profile, or a school's own application to go into more detail. What we're trying to do in a financial aid office is really, when we respond back to you, we want to make it a tailor-made offer as much as we possibly can. We want to take everything we can into consideration. We have this ability, this, authority called professional judgment. It's like a godlike authority. The professional judgment allows us to start with FAFSA information, for example, but then really to modify it, to tweak it, because there's something else going on. Sure, 2015 income was 150,000. 2016 income is going to be half of that for whatever reason. We can take that into account. We can then say, nope, base everything on the projected income, or take into consideration that there were $10,000 of medical expenses, or emergency home repair, or lots of things that we can take into consideration that we won't find out about unless or until you fill out one of these supplemental applications. So they're very good and they're very beneficial to be able to know whether you should fill one out and to get that into our hands so that we can take that into consideration. What we're trying to do is create this financial aid offer to you, this financial aid award letter or financial aid announcement, called lots of different things. But really it's a combination of the grants, the scholarships, the student loans, the work study, kind of the all in. It tells you what the costs are for the upcoming school year, what your financial aid, what your son or daughter's financial aid eligibility would consist of, what your bottom line is, what your out-of-pocket will be. Could be very different from school to school for lots of different reasons, depending on the resources one school has over another, depending on, honestly, depending on how much one school wants your child over another school that really wants them more. There are some schools that, as they balance their freshman class, any given year, they may have more music scholarships to offer than they ever did before. And so we'll really try to recruit and woo bassoon players or musicians of some kind, because they need to fill those gaps at the college. Other schools may say, we're okay in that area. We'll recognize talent, but with just a kind of a token grant or a token scholarship. So any given year, it could be very different, but it really a good question for you to ask when you start to receive these offers back is, why is there a gap? Is there anything more that I can get? Not necessarily, well, let me go back a little bit. Hold on a second. Yeah, cosmetically, this is what the financial aid award letter won't look like. It's a proposal, but the different components on here is what you'll see from the different colleges. You'll see kind of the top part, and it's hard to see up here, I know, but what the costs are. What are the direct costs? What will show up on the tuition bill, as opposed to what do we estimate the student will pay for books and meals on the weekend and travel to and from home and laundry? So kind of differentiate between those two. The middle part will say, here are their grant and scholarship. Here's their grant and scholarship eligibility. The free money. They don't have to pay this back. They need to renew it, but it's kind of a gift to them. As opposed to student loan eligibility, as opposed to work study eligibility. And then eventually, and what's really nice is, although cosmetically award letters don't necessarily look like this, they've got the gist of this, especially the consumer disclosures that show up where here are the chances of getting a job on campus and how much will the student earn. And of all the students who took out student loans and who graduated, how much did they have on average in debt? And what was the default rate of that particular college? And all sorts of really good consumer information that you want and probably need to know. When you get this award letter, really be proactive and kind of decode it and ask us questions. Take a look at the costs, the direct costs versus the indirect costs, the amount of grants and scholarships versus the amount of student loans and work study that are on there, and ask us questions like, will it change if my circumstances get worse? Will it change if my circumstances get better? I guess the Powerball, David Boyle was telling me, is up to $700 million. $700 million. So the next drawing, I think, Saturday. So I got to get my tickets. I've never played before, but I think I will this time because I'm feeling lucky. But so please don't play. I should say, let me back up. Don't play. Don't play. You don't want to play. Yeah. The question is, if you've heard that sometimes when you get a financial aid letter, sometimes one of the schools within the college, like it's a music school, will send you a letter saying, here's a music scholarship. Usually that's not common. Usually it's the other way around. Usually you'll get the scholarship first, and then the financial aid award letter that kind of marries all of that, puts it all together for you. So it's very unusual for that to happen, but I won't say it never happens, but it's very unusual for that to happen. Back to that Powerball. If you were to play and if you were to win, yay for you, not for me, but that's when a college might look at you, at your circumstance, and say, you've had a big influx of cash. We might not renew the financial aid at the same level. But we have a building that would look great with your name on it. Maybe we should talk. But really, I say that glibly, but it really has to be an extreme example like that before a college will reduce any offers of financial aid to you over the years. And a good question to ask when you get this offer, ask them straight out. Can I expect the same amount all 4 years? And unless your circumstances change dramatically, yes, you can expect that offer all 4 years. We're not, technologically, we don't have the capability necessarily, and by law, we can't send out a 4-year award letter, but we've done some unofficial estimates. I met with families saying, this is what, in 2 years, I'm gonna have another child in college, or in 2 years, I'm gonna have one less child in college. Can you project what it might be or predict what it might be for the next 4 years? And so we can sit down. You can talk to colleges and see if they're able to do that for you to give you some sense. Yeah.
Maybe scholarship off. Is there success in exploring? Is it all there is? Like a better term, how often will college negotiate or
Yeah, good question. We hate the word negotiate, of course, but to be perfectly honest with you, I do so much flea market shopping more than ever before in my life that I find myself, I swear, going into Jewel thinking, I wonder if I can get these navel oranges for less than $3.99 for this package. True story. I just sent an email to the gym I belong to. I sent them an email saying, you know what, I've been a member since when you were still building the club. There's another club that opened up. I want to have access to both these clubs, and I would really like to have, my monthly payment reduced a little bit. They sent me back an email yesterday saying, okay, you'll have all access, and we're only going to charge you $69 a month. I think I'm paying like $90 right now. Like, okay, well, I asked, and they came through. Honestly, I don't know why they did it now at this time of year in January when everybody is joining a gym, and I go into the gym and then there's 75% of the people I've never seen before in my life, but they did it. So it doesn't hurt to ask, but sometimes you will get no as an answer, and that's a legitimate answer from the college. We definitely will consider other circumstances that have come up since the time of application. If stocks have tanked, since the time you fill out the FAFSA, we'll take that into account. If income has decreased or expenses have increased, we'll take that into account. That's a legitimate way that we can look at it. A lot of colleges divide their appeals into 2 categories, want and need. Those who need it because something happened, and those that just want it, who are flea market shoppers like me and say, well, let's try it. We got nothing to lose. But they may, depending on the time of year, if they're offering music scholarships and all of a sudden none of their music scholarships are being accepted, that may free up more music dollars. So to make the short answer even longer, it doesn't hurt to ask. Absolutely, you've got nothing to lose. I would recommend that you go in and say, is there anything that we can do to help? We really are going to find it a stretch, but yeah. Right. Good question about increases and college costs every year. The reason that, and honestly, like our living expenses, colleges have living expenses like utilities and insurance and liability, and that is one of the main reasons for the growth in college costs. And on average, for private colleges, we see the cost increase of about 2 or 3% every year. For public universities, we see a little bit more than that, a lot of times because they're not getting as much state subsidy as they used to. I mean, when you look at some of the costs, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign just for tuition fees, room and board, $30,000 a year, just for tuition fees, room and board. Private colleges on average, could be 50,000. There are 300 private colleges whose sticker price exceeds $60,000 a year. So when we talk about, we don't talk about sticker price anymore because 90% of all the students get some type of financial aid. But when we talk about financial aid offers and price increases, usually what happens is colleges will kind of split the difference with the family. If tuition fees, room and board increases by $1,500 next year, usually the grant or scholarship will go up by $500 or $700, and then the family will contribute another $500 or $1,000. So usually it's that split the difference, but that is a good question to ask. What will it look like, every year for the next 4 years? Colleges will be very quick, should be quick to tell you that. Ma'am, yeah. Yeah, so the question is, the FAFSA, no, it doesn't talk about special circumstances. It's these standalone, these institutional financial aid applications that address special circumstances. So it's the profile, or if the college doesn't use a profile, contact the college to see what means they have in order to address your special circumstance. Almost everybody has a standalone form to address some type of, all the different types of special circumstances out there. Yeah, so. Correct. The question is, the CSS profile is a supplemental application and does not replace the FAFSA. The FAFSA is mandatory for every school. The profile just kind of supplements it, or the school's application supplements it. No, so when a school requires the profile to be completed, it's a requirement, and usually it's because they want to know more about you because they have more money to give you. So they want to be able to maximize your eligibility. You have to fill them out, yeah, and look for that required forms as opposed to optional or beneficial. Our special circumstance forms on our page, our website, just say, hey, these are optional, but if they pertain to you, fill it out, get it into us, and get it in like right away, so that when we make an offer, we're taking everything we can into consideration. Yeah. When I talk about financial aid, I'm talking about everything: student loans, work study, scholarships, grants, anything that's got a financial dollar amount to it. That's all considered financial aid, right? Yeah. Did you have a? Yeah, so the question is, when you want to call a financial aid office, who are you going to call? Usually, there will be a contact person for freshmen. There'll be a contact person for the students who are applying from Glenbrook South and North, or students applying from the North Shore. There will be someone who is your contact, your liaison. And yes, you should be able to stick with them for all 4 years. That's the premise. That's what we like, because then you're not reinventing or telling us the story 4 times over to a different staff member. So at Lake Forest College, we try to deal with, we have segments. And so if you get me, then you're stuck with me for all 4 years. So yay. Let me do a real quick timeline. I think John is giving me the evil eye. So you got to finish up, Joe. You got to finish up. Real quick, completing the federal student aid ID, doing that tonight, if you can, so that you can access the FAFSA right away. Completing that after January 1st. Checking to see colleges' websites if other applications are needed. Ask us questions. Get the financial aid offer, the financial aid award letter over the next couple months. May 1st is a drop dead date. It's one of those. It's called the National Candidate Reply Date. That's where a student needs to commit to the college, accept the offer of admission, accept the offer of financial aid. After May 1, all bets are off. Colleges start to rescind offers and put students on wait lists. So that's why this is a great time, to do this program. Gives you a sense of what's going on the next couple months, so that it gives you plenty of time to talk to the college, to visit them again and see if it's a fit both academically and financially. See if that's where the student wants to go. Throughout this whole process, I'm passionate about these deadlines. Unfortunately, we see too many students miss out. I'm not kidding, on thousands of dollars because they have missed a deadline by a day or a minute. The State of Illinois grant program, the MAP grant, if you fill the application out at 12:01 a.m. the day after the deadline, you're out. You're out for consideration for the entire school year. There's no going back. Know the priority deadlines as opposed to the preferential deadlines, I guess. Some colleges will say these are drop dead dates. Some colleges will say, we'd love to have it by this date. The sooner you get it in, the sooner you'll hear from us. Some will say it's a first come, first serve. So any given year, we could go past February 15th or past March 1st. But the sooner you get it in, the better. And not only for admission purposes or financial aid purposes, for scholarship purposes, whether it's scholarships from the college or outside sources or other agencies, you can find lots of really good help. I mentioned earlier, at South and North, you've got some absolutely stellar counseling staff who can answer any questions that you have. If they cannot answer them, John, David, any of them can call me and I will help answer any questions, even if you're not interested in Lake Forest College. I love answering questions. I just love, solving problems. So a couple of these sites that I've got listed here, I think are really good sites. The College Zone is the State of Illinois site that goes into more the MAP grant, the state scholarship programs that it offers to teachers. The finaid.org site is a really good site. It's pretty dense, lots of words, but it's written and maintained by the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. So it's got some really good information about everything: scholarship search services, scholarship scams, calculators, all sorts of different things on there. And then the college websites, themselves, that's the place that you want to get more specific information about that particular college. I know that I talked a lot, and I probably have gone over my allotted time. I'm sorry about that. But any questions that I didn't answer, anything that you didn't want me to talk about that I did, but yeah. Yeah, so when you're doing an estimate on the form, if you're within, if you say your income is $150,000 and it ends up being $155,000, it's not going to matter. Usually I say as a ballpark, a $10,000 swing, both good or bad, is not going to make a difference in the bottom line. More than 10,000, yes, it will.
So then that means that more than 10,000.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So if an award is made, a financial aid offer is made on $150,000, and all of a sudden you find that your income is really $175,000, we'll have to go back in to see if that changes anything, and if it does, it could reduce the offer that we made initially. So that's why it is important to be as close as you can. You don't have to be absolutely correct. And if there's any time in your life that you've gotten your taxes done early in the process, now is the time to get them done. When you have a child in college, you'll want to get that absolute final information. If you're filing extensions, that could be rough because colleges will still give you that estimate, but not be able to give you a final award until the tax return is done, until you've gone back in and done the data retrieval tool. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate your time. Did you want to say anything? No? Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. Thanks for letting me chat with you.
And we'll have handouts for you. So as you're walking out, if you want to come to the front, we'll make sure that you get one of these handouts. So thanks again. Thank you, Jerry.
My pleasure. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So if a student is independent, you have to show why they're independent. If they're 24 years old, then they would have to prove that they're independent. So they have to show us that they're self-supporting. They have to say, I'm living on my own. I have to live with my parents. Here's my address. Here's my apartment lease. How you pay your bills? You have to prove to us that. That will make a huge difference. That will do twice as much. So you'll get twice as much. No, you'll get, it will make. So how many of those are when you know so long? No, you have a different. So your ID can be the same. The student's ID will be different. Okay.
My information from one side to another.
That's exactly the yeah. Okay. All right. They will know. That's one of the questions they ask for on the application. How many you have in college? Could be something. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Credit rating. Yes, it does. That's why I like it. I like it a lot. But it's worth it. I mean, absolutely, it's that, starting creditworthiness, skill name. I like it. All right. Thank you so much. You're welcome. No, not at all. It's all based on the student. Yeah, parents' information is asked for on there, but it doesn't matter. All right. I would do it. One of the other